Good evening and welcome to Simpson at 8. The election campaign period for the 2022 elections has started and parties have started trading blows on key election issues such as the debt, economic growth, and socio-economic issues that affect people's lives. Earlier this week, the Fijian government released its pre-election economic and fiscal update, which details the current economic and fiscal performance and outlook for the Fijian economy, details on government debt, and other socio-economic indicators. Joining me this evening to discuss economic issues facing the country and how he sees his party's prospects this early in the campaign is Unity Fiji Party Leader Savenaca Narube. Mr. Narube, welcome to Simpson at 8.
Thank you.
Right. Let's start with some of the recent issues that you have been at the center of this week. Newspaper front page, particularly that you were told to lie about the state of the Fijian economy while governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji. Who told you to lie?
Of course, the interim administration, they wanted to paint a better picture of where the economy was and the financial situation.
Was there anyone specifically that asked you to lie?
I won't name it, but it's absolutely clear in my mind that it was the interim administration.
It was the interim administrations. Okay, so what did they tell you to lie about?
As I said, they wanted me to paint a better picture of where the economy was 2 years after the coup in 2006, and a better financial position than we were. So I've always said that, and I'll repeat that again. They asked me to lie, but I did not lie.
You did not lie.
I did not lie. So that's a big difference in that. People are assuming that they told me to lie and I lied.
Were you specifically told to lie, or were you just told to interpret something a different way?
Yes, interpret it the way it was not the best interpretation or the right interpretation of the picture that we were receiving.
Because this is what Syed Qayyum said. If you were indeed told to lie and you were aggrieved by it, why didn't you talk about it earlier on? You've provided no proof, and I also interviewed you in 2018, and I did ask you, under what circumstances did you leave the Reserve Bank? And you did not talk about lying. This is actually what you said.
Yeah.
So why and how did you leave the governorship of the Reserve Bank? Did you just leave on your own free will, or were you forced out?
I was forced out, basically, in 2009, when the Supreme Court made a ruling that the Constitution of 1997 still legally protects the position of Garcia's government. So that's when they removed the 1997 Constitution, the day after that. And in that Constitution is the position of governor, as well as some other senior independent positions in government. So when the Constitution was thrown out of the window, I went with it.
You went with it. So it wasn't to do with the devaluation of your decision to oppose the devaluation that the government was proposing in 2009?
It may have. It may have. For me, I opposed the devaluation. I thought that was not the time to burden the people with higher cost of living. It's not the time to devalue the Fiji dollar, because that doesn't make sense in economic rationale.
So that's what you told me in 2018. You did not mention anything about the lie in that interview. In fact, you talked about that it had to do with the abrogation of the 1997 Constitution, as the Attorney General has stated in the recent press conference, that the 1997 Constitution was abrogated and constitutional appointments such as yours had to be removed. So why bring out the issue about the lie now?
I didn't mention the lie at our interview. That doesn't mean I didn't mention it in other situations, because obviously I was removed. So if I had lied, I maybe have not been removed at that time. So that's the reason some of us in the constitutional officers were removed, because we refused to follow what we were told by the interim administration.
But it happened with the abrogation of the 1997 Constitution. Without that, you probably would have stayed on in your position.
Well, that's speculation.
Okay. Now, that issue is in the past. And really, the only reason why that's come up now is because you brought it up yourself. And many of us in the media, we've heard of this for the first time. So let's move on to the present. And the government, the issue right now, we talk about economic growth. The government has forecast economic growth at around 11%. What do you think of that forecast?
It is too optimistic. I have also raised that in the past, that considering the risks that we face, global as well as domestic, I think we need to be more realistic of those risks and our vulnerabilities to those risks. So government has called it very, very badly in the past. We have pointed that out to government that you're too optimistic. You know, when you are optimistic, it impacts on other variables that you deal with in government.
But this,
so that spoils the policies that you put in place based on optimistic forecasts.
But you may say it's optimistic, but this is based by the figures that they have in hand. I mean, these projections, they are put together by what's known as the Macroeconomic Committee within the Reserve Bank of Fiji. So you are questioning the very institutions that you once worked for and the credibility of the people who are in it. I mean, they also have the credibility is also on the line.
Yeah, I'm saying please look at the risk a little bit more realistically. And I believe they are not looking at that risk. But go back to their track record of projections. It's terrible. Government's terrible.
Give an example?
Yes. In 2020, they forecasted the economy to decline by 5%, I believe, initially. They jumped to 10, and then they jumped to 21.
That was before the COVID, when COVID came in.
So those are the examples of being too optimistic. In 2021, they also said that it was going to grow. In 2021, it turned out to be a deficit or a negative growth.
One could say, to be fair to them, no government, not even the major countries, the more well-resourced, bigger countries, developed countries of the world, could have forecast the COVID-19 pandemic. Would you agree?
Yes, we do. But when you have uncertainties that you don't know, you put in more risk to your projection.
Don't be so optimistic.
Yes.
Don't be painting such a rosy
because there's a
picture.
cost of being optimistic.
So the Macroeconomic Committee has based their optimistic projections based on the figures that they have and the assumptions they've made based on the figures that they've looked at. What figures or statistics are you looking at to make your assumptions?
The basis there, at least for 2022 growth of over 11% on tourism.
Around 11.3.
11.3, basically on tourism growth. You get that wrong, that growth rate tumbles down below 10. So we think that tourism will take us out, but it might take a little bit more time to
How much more
recover.
time? I think you said 5 years.
In total, from 2020.
Okay, so the jury's out, and we'll see how that works out and who will make the right forecast. But some of the other more renowned international bodies, such as ANZ, they've projected a bigger economic growth, a growth of 20%. And you think that's overly more optimistic than the government, or?
Absolutely.
Or the government is saying they're actually more conservative than ANZ in the outlook.
Yeah, it's all relative. But it depends on how you look at the risks. So I don't know what the basis of that 21% is. I mean, what are the sector that is going to pull us out of this? It's just tourism at the moment. Mm-hmm. There's hardly any other sector that's out there that will help this growth. So you get that wrong, you get another crisis in tourism, what happens? We tumble down in our growth. We expose ourselves to those risks.
What would you advise me to government how they can really make an 11% growth if they put the resources elsewhere aside from tourism?
You look at their policies now, there's nothing that in there to diversify the economy. I've been calling about diversifying the economy. Every economies have been doing that. But they still focus on one, which is tourism. Tourism is good, but what about the other agriculture sectors? Forestry, fishing, which have been really, really badly hit for a long time. Why are we not touching that?
All right.
That is where we get our growth from.
All right, okay. We've been asked to go to a break. You're watching Simpson at 8. We're with Unity Party Leader Savenaca Narube. Don't go away. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back. You're watching Simpson at 8. Stanley Simpson, and we're with Savenaca Narube, Unity Fiji Party Leader. Now, last year you proposed an alternative budget, which included a lot of cuts in government spending and cut in the civil service. Attorney General says, he said, thank you for doing that alternative budget, but he was lucky that they did not follow budget because he said it would be a disaster because you recommended a large budget cut and a big salary deduction for civil servants. He said this would have shrunk the economy would have stalled and died at a moment when it needed to keep moving. What's your response?
Well, the economy is nearly dying now for what he has done. What we did was to reshuffle expenses, not to cut expenses. And this is what the government has not done. We need to reshuffle expenses, reprioritize expenses out from the wastage into a more productive expenses. We didn't cut government spending. In fact, we had it the same as in the previous year. So there's no cut. He's wrong.
There would have been impacts from those cuts, however, in terms of keeping the economy going and the consumption power that needed to be done.
We would have grown the economy more with those expenses shifting to more productive expenses rather than wasteful expenses. So we would have grown the economy much more. So there's no truth in what the Attorney General says.
So what would you have done?
As I said, we would have shifted expenses, reprioritized them to more productive areas of expenses, cut wages, wastage, and put it into more priority areas.
Because that's more a government, almost what you're stating, basically more government-led kind of growth, when Attorney General is saying that the relief that they provided in keeping those things going was that it managed to keep the many businesses surviving in terms of the funds that were available to be used. He says, the form of relief, the reduced F&P of contribution rate provided much relief as part of a wider policy package decided to ensure the survival of many businesses. That's how we managed to keep business afloat, revive them. And if we had done what you had done, it would have closed a lot of business, and thousands of Fijians would have been permanently unemployed.
What proof does he have? What proof does he have that he has helped the businesses? Many small businesses have closed. We know that. So in economic rationale, the quality of that spending determines the returns that the economy has. His return is very small compared to ours. So the multiplier impact of our policies of shifting expenses to more productive areas would have got us much better results than what he has. So I ask him, give us proof.
All right. As I said, both of you will not be able to prove. I mean, the jury is out of that. It's on to the people to decide which assessment or analysis they think is more sound. And then you, as you said in the previous segment, 5% projection, government 11.3% projection of economic growth for this year. You're saying that tourism will take 5 years to recover. Government thinking that it'll be a much faster recovery at present. Now let's move on to the debt, because I've just, as you know, the government has just announced that Fiji's debt to GDP ratio increased to over 80% of GDP at the end of March 2022, compared to around 48% of GDP pre-pandemic. And this is expected to increase to around 88.6% of GDP by the end of July 2022. So how are you seeing government's debt? Given, I mean, they're stating I know it's high, but they said, look, we came in from the worst pandemics the world has ever seen. So are they had to do what they needed to do to survive.
Yeah.
What is your view?
There are two issues I would like to raise on that particular policy. What I see this government policy is just to spend and borrow. It says in the update that they had to maintain expenses when the revenue was dropping by $2 billion or more dollars. So that expenses to me was of low quality and were many of them ineffective. The second, he said he had to borrow to prop up foreign reserves. In my assessment, there was no need to borrow to prop up foreign reserves. Foreign reserves would have remained comfortable because demand for imports would have gone lower. So that, to me, was a wrong policy.
So you would have said that we could have reduced the amount of foreign reserves had to just...
we would have tolerated...
Instead of taking on the debts?
No, yes, absolutely. We didn't need to borrow to prop up foreign reserves. Foreign reserves would have been at a comfortable level for us.
Because
so there you are. They're borrowing, they're spending and borrowing. And that's where we are now with the debt at over 86%.
I'm quoting the Minister for Economy, the Attorney General, a lot because, he's been making this statement. He said, Fiji has over 10 times more government revenue available to service interest repayments. He says, our revenues are over $3 billion in a normal year, and debt servicing is just over $350 million in interest payments. So for Fiji to be unable to service its debt, our revenue will have to fall below $300 million, which he's saying is an extremely unlikely scenario. So even during COVID-19, the worst ever national crisis, we managed to maintain revenues at around $2 billion. So in other words, in the estimation, government's estimation, it was responsible borrowing.
I don't believe that. It was too high a borrowing. We really didn't need to borrow that much. What I see what I noted in the update, they talk a lot about smart borrowing, concessional borrowing, but they never talked about the servicing ratios of debt. Yeah? If you look at the ratio of our debt servicing, including principal, we calculated to about 40% of our domestic revenue. So 40 cents in a dollar that we get from our revenue is going to repay debt. What has it said? There's no indications of
government
debt
is saying our future principal debt repayments average around $350 million of a $3 billion average revenue, which is saying is easily refinanced and repaid.
We take revenue from domestic revenue because we have to, that's the only control levers that we have on domestic revenue. If you take domestic revenue, which is around $1.7 billion, calculate the debt service, including principal repayment, which I believe is over $600 million, we are into that very serious figure of around 40% of our domestic revenue flowing to repay that. That's not mentioned.
We will check the figures. As I'm no economist.
They never mention that in a very, very important document like this.
All right, we'll come to that document and we'll check those figures. As I said, we're journalists, we're not economists, but we look at the figures. You may interpret the figures better than we do. But another issue that the government says why this is manageable is that Fiji has secured $900 million in highly concessional external debt, as you said, long maturity terms of 40 years, 10-year grace period, near zero interest rates. So what they're saying is our debt is spread over a very long period of time and more manageable. And so it's not like we're going to be suddenly burdened with it. We can manage it over a long period and they're more sustainable.
Yeah, he can defend the debt as much as he can. But the bottom line is debt servicing and the total debt stock to your economy. Our economy is small, it's tiny. It cannot sustain a debt ratio of 88%. I believe the debt ratio should be 92%. But We can't. That's the universal message.
So
that
when
we
you're saying
need to
the
hear.
debt ratio 92%, you think the actual figure is 90?
2%.
Based on what?
If you look at our deficit for this year at 14% of GDP, put that on top of our debt last year, it gives you over 90% of that. So I think there is an inconsistency there in the way they calculate debt to GDP.
All right, okay, so you're saying it's irresponsible, it's going to be a big burden, it's going to affect the thing. The government is saying, look, this is easily serviced, it's just a portion of what we earn. Even during COVID-19, we raised 2 billion. And this is over a long term, which means it's manageable. And you don't agree with that?
Yeah, what is he adding to revenue that he's saying is 3 billion? Is it also including grants from overseas? We cannot sustain those kind of things. We must base our repayment based on revenue that is sustainable.
All right. Just before we carry on, he is also stating, the government is also stating, apart from that, these debts that's being taken, it's being used for capital infrastructure, which ensures that government is able to return and repay the debt into the future. And also that a lot of this debt are from third-party validation, from agencies like the IMF, World Bank, ADB, ANZ, Westpac, and other international credit rating agencies. Does it give you comfort that these international institutions, respected international institutions, are saying, no, Fiji is okay at the moment?
I think it's situational. At a time of this crisis, those institutions would support us to get out of this crisis. But we ourselves, we need to make informed decisions of where we should go and what is the prudent thing to do. I don't see that in this government. Of course, they will produce figures that are rosy to support whatever they're doing. We are looking at an alternative scenario. There is justification for that alternative scenario.
Well, whoever will come in, whoever comes in and takes over the government, you're going to be, we are all, we got this debt. We got this debt.
Yep.
It's too late. We cannot unborrow,
Yes.
so to speak.
Absolutely.
What will you do to reduce the debt if you get into government, before we go to the break?
Yeah, there are two aspects of it. One is expenditure reforms. We really need to spend time to analyze our reform. And the second is to grow the economy based on those resources that we have.
Diversification.
Diversification.
All right. You're watching Simpson at 8. Don't go away. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back. You're watching Simpson at 8. Stanley Simpson, and we're with Savenaca Narube, Unity Fiji Party Leader. Now, this week, government released pre-election economic and fiscal update. First time ever. It's a requirement under the Financial Management Amendment Act of 2021 that they put out the statistics, and therefore any political parties, including yourself, if you want to put anything out, any policy about how you're going to fund something or build a bridge or any infrastructure, capital works, you will have to explain where you'll get the money from, and essentially the issues, and and that's a requirement under this, and therefore that they have released this update for you to then be able to get your figures from. So let's just start. What do you think of this provision being implemented for the first time? The government says this is good for the country because it makes sure it's it's more mature in terms of the way we present stuff and more comprehensive.
I think it was just introduced to entrap opposition parties. How in the world will opposition parties get cost of building bridges, building roads? How would they get that? How would they get the implication of that into revenue and into deficit and even borrowing? That's ridiculous. We're probably the only country in the world that has this provision. I challenge the Minister for the Economy to tell us which other countries have this.
This requirement.
This requirement. It is ridiculous.
So basically, from what I gather in his statement, the figures are all in that 24-page statement that they've provided.
The figures would be on the macro side, GDP and so forth. Is he saying that we should follow that GDP projections if we have other alternative projections that we believe are much more credible than his? Why would he do that? Huh?
So you think it's designed to just box you in and
Absolutely.
and
What else?
basically limit your ability to contact? I mean, from the government side, they're saying this will make you more responsible with what you promise the people.
But responsibility is something. Another is where would we get the figures? Can we just produce a figure out of thin air and that satisfy this requirement? I don't think so. That will make a mockery out of this.
You've had a look at the update and the figures that are contained in it?
Yes.
And it's not enough to make any policy or maybe make calculations from there?
There may be, but it's totally just inefficient or insufficient for us to make all those estimates, of course, based on what is in the update. Who would have the technical know-how to estimate those kind of things? We don't. Only government does.
So obviously the resources required, you don't think parties have that to produce this kind of...
We're a political party, not building bridges. We don't have those figures. So,
all right,
it's ridiculous provision.
So if more information was provided, you'd be more... it would be more... You think it would be better if more information were provided, or you have access to other details that can make you make these recommendations? Or
we will do our best. We will have to comply with the regulations, with the legislations. Yeah, we will do our best to do it. But as I said, we can pluck a figure out of thin air and it will satisfy this requirement.
And you're challenging this.
We are challenging it in court. With the Fiji Labour Party, we have challenged it in court. We have filed a court case on this.
All right, so we'll leave that then to the courts to decide. Let's turn to politics. You've just mentioned the Fiji Labour Party. You've kind of joined in a coalition. I'm confused sometimes about what's happening there. Is it a coalition? Because you say it's done by individuals and it's not. Is it party to party or individual? Just individuals talking.
No, this word coalition is not the right word to use.
Okay.
In our case, under our law.
Right, I understand. But I mean, you're basically forming a kind of alliance.
Yeah, we had signed an MOU with Fiji Labour Party just to pool our resources to try to pool all opposition parties into a united front before the elections. We had failed.
All right.
So that MOU is now lapsed.
What was the reason for the failure?
Because other parties refused to come into a grand partnership before the election.
Was the issue about also who will lead?
The leadership could have been resolved in that, within that.
So you also, I understand, was talking with Sodelpa, is that correct? Is there some talks, or is that just
with
rumor?
PEP and NFP also together, and they didn't invite us. They decided to go at it alone with the two of them. We're talking with Sodelpa.
Okay. I think that they've invited you, if I recall correctly. They said that you were invited, but you refused.
No.
So you were not invited. So
I was not invited to that partnership.
To that partnership. Okay. So, and then you basically stating that you do not like the leadership of PEP, essentially, or you do not like the militarization of leadership in this country. I mean, when you talk about military, Fiji First has a military, with a military background, and Pacific People's Alliance, party has so Rambuka and Bainimarama. What's wrong with the military leaders with military backgrounds?
Yeah, I think for 24 years now, 25 years, we have been led by military personnel. As I always stress, when you change from a military personnel to be a leader of a country, it needs a different skill set for the country. And we need to choose leaders that have that skill set. And I'm saying for too long, the military has been leading this. In general, I'm not referring to anyone in particular, but the military has led us for 25 years. What's wrong with civilian leadership?
Well, there's only two people in particular you can refer to, it's Bainimarama and Rambuka.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm putting those on the table, that this is an issue for this election, that we need to know that there is a cost of choosing a wrong leader. And that cost is quite large for Fiji, and is paid and carried more by the poorer people. So we need to change that.
So Rambuka responded and said that, well, it takes more than just being a simple economist to lead the country. There's much more to leading the country than just by knowing the economics. You have to have knowledge, skills in other areas. Your response before we go to another issue.
Yeah, well, very much. I said that a leader now, with our financial and economic situation the way it is, a leader with economic background is much more superior than one without. And attributes of leadership, I think we all have some of that. We all aspire to have a bit more. But I think basically you really need to know what national leadership and what the issues that the countries are facing is about.
All right, we have a few minutes now just to talk about the political angle of this in terms of, it's really going to come down to be about numbers. And basically your numbers in the eyes and the views of many in opposition helped Fiji First win the last elections because you took away important votes that should have gone to the opposition. That gained the threshold, but then basically your votes were not counted at all. So what happened in the last election?
It's too simplistic a way to look at our votes. It's assuming that our votes would have gone to Soderpa and other opposition. They're assuming that. It may go back to Fiji First. So let's not make that assumption. I think what we need to do, that 2018 is gone. We look forward to 2022.
But I think the lessons remain the same, because if you do not make the threshold, the same thing happens, whether it making the assumption whether it goes to Fiji First or to People's Alliance or to SODELPA or NFP, it's still, if you don't meet the threshold, your votes are not counted.
You are making that assumption, that 2018 will be the same pattern as this year. Well, we are saying no, it's not. Well, 2018 is history, this one is yet to be.
Yes, right. Of course, 2022 will be much different.
Yes,
everyone will see.
This is different.
But at the same time, you had made an assumption in 2018. You told me in this, on this show, in 2018, you said you had checked on polling and you've done your own research and you found that there was a big voter bloc in the middle that did not want Fiji First and did not want SODELPA and was ripe for the taking, and that you were going to get it. Your votes, if my numbers are same, is 6,000 votes. Unity Fiji, 6,896 votes of the percentage, which was 1.5%. So you did not get that middle vote, or you made a wrong assumption. And you yourself got 2,811 votes. And the next one on Fiji First, which was Alfred Bolivar, was 432 votes. So learning from that, how are you trying not to make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes?
Oh, we're just getting people to be aware of us. We didn't have time in 2018, about 10 months to prepare a new party. So we have learned our lessons from there. So we are going out a lot more. Our presence in the media is a lot more. People now know more about us and what we could do to this country. So based on that, I think our numbers will be much different, quite opposite of what happened in 2018.
So reaching the threshold to make sure it's counted.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And what key issues is Unity Fiji Party standing on in the elections? I mean, you haven't released your manifesto, but what are the key issues?
It is going to be economic and financial, because that's what we are facing. It is going to be poverty. That's what this country is suffering a lot.
Bread and butter issues.
Bread and butter issues. That's where the vote should be. Bread and butter issues. So we are going to very much focus on poverty reduction, saving our country from financial ruin and growing the economy, diversifying it to resource-based industries.
Savenaca Narube, thank you for joining me on Simpson Edit.
Thank you.
No. That was the show for the evening. Join me again next Thursday at the same time. Good night.